All right. It is now noon, and it's already a number of people on waiting for us to get started. So let's get to it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting webinar. Uh, we have a great presentation today, and in typical Imagine fashion, it's going to cover a lot. We're going to tackle making sense of all of this privacy talk that people are talking about. Then I'm going to walk through the setup of perhaps the top two online advertising channels, Google and Facebook. So by the time this is all over, you'll have a step-by-step walkthrough on how to get ad campaigns started on both platforms. I'm Patrick King, I'm the founder of Imagine. We're a branding and marketing agency specializing in smaller destinations. Now, a lot of talk is going around about the future of online advertising, right? Many people are saying that these privacy improvements that Apple is making regarding, iOS, and regarding Facebook, and the changes that Google is making with Chrome, that they're threatening the success of advertising. But I respectfully disagree. Let's talk a bit about what these changes are, and then we'll cover how you can set up your ad accounts with some best practices along the way. And I think a good place for us to start would be with cookies. Yes, cookies are bits of code that look or taste nothing like cookies, but instead they're downloaded onto your computer as you download a web page. And while they're on your computer for a set period of time, they'll deliver information back to the website you visited, and ergo, with everything that you've downloaded from them. Most websites do this, in fact. If you have Google Analytics on your website, you're probably doing the same thing to your visitors. And that's how you get the data that's in analytics. There are a few different types of cookies, but there are really only two that matter among the changes that we're seeing with these platforms. Now, first party cookies are limited to one website. So let's say you go onto Facebook and they place a cookie on your computer. Well, that really only works if you're going to be on Facebook. They'll keep an eye on the pages that you've liked, the stuff that you've engaged with. Really, that's about it. Um, Third party cookies are a little more complicated. So that's where you get a lot of this crossover where you watch a video on YouTube and all of a sudden you're being sold the same stuff you watched when you go onto Amazon, that sort of stuff. So they travel you. I mean, they follow you as you travel through the web. Now, third-party cookies are the most valuable to advertisers historically because they follow the visitor's actions farther, but they're also the ones most under fire now, and they're in the process of being phased out. They're also growing increasingly unreliable, and they give advertising platforms more and more useless information. So the fact that they're going away doesn't really hurt advertisers that much. They just reduce the amount of data that we get in, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And this has been going on for a couple of years now. Back in 2019, Firefox was the first browser to disable third-party cookies by default. Now, you could go into the settings and turn that back on, but of course, why would you? Safari did the same thing in 2020. Google plans to have it set by default next year, and Microsoft Edge, well, who knows? Microsoft's browser has so few users that it doesn't really amount to much data for tracking anyway. In fact, Microsoft Edge is only used by less than 5% of all users. The behemoth, the green bar you see up at the top, is Google Chrome. They dominate. They're almost up to 70% of browser usage. So the elimination of third-party cookies on that particular browser signals the end of third-party tracking. We'll still have first party; those aren't going anywhere. But as I mentioned, their functionality is going to be a bit limited. So, what are Facebook, Google, Amazon, etc., doing about this? Mostly nothing. Much of the value that these channels provide to advertisers are in creating better, more customized user experiences on their own channels. Facebook doesn't want you to leave Facebook. Google has a ton of properties from search to Gmail to YouTube. So it doesn't really need to worry so much about third party cookies. The way that Google is adjusting to still gathering data, it's changing slightly. Instead of cookies, they're still using your website history. Remember, Chrome is a Google product, and then it groups you into what it calls cohorts. So, are groups of people segmented by specific interests. So, instead of knowing everything about you, your personal data, all that stuff, which is available, they're only instead going to be providing advertisers with what cohorts they fall into. Now, the number of cohorts, how specific they're going to be, that'll change with time, I'm sure. And I'll get into how this works more deeply in a bit. But what's important to remember is that this approach that Google is taking won't allow for cookies to be carried over from Chrome to Safari or Firefox. Your Google experience will be limited to Chrome alone. So, what's changed for advertisers? A few things within each platform, and the best way I can go over these within any context is to walk you through how to set up and manage ad accounts in each one. So let's do that with the big two, Google and Facebook. We're going to take a zero third party cookie approach with each. Um, each has its own strategies, but you'll notice that they kind of have the same common threads. Now, to start, there is a distinct difference between boosted posts and Facebook ads. Boosting a post is pretty user friendly. I'm sure most of us have done it, if not all of us. You create a post, you guess at an audience, set a budget, submit it for approval. Super easy. But at the same time, it's also super limited. What we're looking at here, for those unfamiliar with it, is Facebook's ad manager. We all have access to it as Facebook users. You can ignore all the campaigns on this page, basically the bottom 75%. These are all, you know, campaigns that we have run or are running. What I'd like to direct your attention to is the tabs at the top here. Starting from the left, we see a tab for the Resource Center. This area is important for those that have run or are currently running ads on Facebook through the ad manager. See, as Apple is releasing better privacy features in iOS 14, I think it is, Facebook is periodically throwing notifications and recommendations for your campaigns in this area. One of the things that you might notice is that you're going to have to verify your domain. And I'll talk about that in a second. But it's good to keep an eye on this. One thing they do mention here, and they're very clear about, is that advertisers will see their audience counts go down in time as more people apply these updates to their Apple devices. They'll also note, as I said, that you'll need to verify your domain for user tracking through the addition of a tracking script. If you've ever set up Google Search Console or some other Google tools, this will be familiar. They basically give you a file and you have to upload it to your site. Um, if if that's a challenge at all, feel free, give us a call and we can help you verify your domain. It's no problem. The remaining three tabs here show the breakdown of your Facebook ad campaigns. While boosted posts are really just pertain to one very short term piece of content, Facebook ads allow you to do much, much more. Your campaign level, and this is a breakdown of the three tabs. Your campaign level is where you determine the ultimate goal, right? Do you want website traffic? Are you just looking for engagement? Do you want event signups? Whatever. And this is also where you set up your budget optimization. Your ad set level is where you apply your budget, determine how much you want to spend, which platforms you want the ads to run on, whether you want it to show up in Messenger, you want it to show up in Instagram. That's where you define that. And then your ad level is just strictly for creative. It's your images, copy, links, and so on. So when it's broken out this way, you can see that each level plays an important part. And since they're broken out this way, you can test various ads under the same budget or the same audience. You can create multiple ad sets under the same campaign settings. It's designed this way to make your work simpler, but to give flexibility for testing and clear budget tracking. So, with that foundation set, let's go through the process of setting up a campaign all the way through publishing ads. Now, when you create a new campaign, the first thing that it's going to ask you is for your buying type and your objectives. The best way to think of these two buying types in terms of destination marketing is that if you go with the reach and frequency option, which will show up right in here, Facebook will require you to set an audience of over 200,000 people. Unless somehow you've reunited Led Zeppelin for a one time concert, you're probably not looking at an audience that large. So we'll go with the auction option. For this example, we're going to want website traffic for a specific community event. We don't have a clear way to track conversions on our site. We just want people to be aware of the upcoming events, local businesses, and so on. So essentially, we want people to come to the site. We want traffic. At the bottom, if you have the option to name the campaign, which I consider to be a little less than optional, I mean, that's pretty much a requirement. But when you open this dropdown, you'll see that you can go ahead and create the name of you can create and name your first ad set and your first ad. And this is a good way to get everything started, but unlike naming the campaign itself, these are really optional. When you hit continue, the next screen has a bunch of stuff on it. But you'll see right here that the next screen has a special ad category drop down, which for all of us on this call and as it pertains to tourism and hospitality, it can be left untouched. These special ad categories are like political campaigns or credit and housing and stuff like that. And when you pick one, they're going to reduce your targeting options since things like income, race, and so on shouldn't be taken into consideration when advertising those sorts of things. So it makes sense. Um, A/B testing, which is really comparing the success of one ad creative to another, that has been moved to after you've launched your campaign, which makes sense since it needs to come after you've created your ads. But there is a new feature on here that I prefer to use instead, and we'll get to that shortly. At the bottom of the page, you'll see where you can set either a daily budget or a lifetime budget. A good rule of thumb is to start with at least 20 bucks a day because that amount will give you the data you need to more quickly adjust your campaign. Any less and data is going to come in more slowly, so it's really a balancing act of how quickly you want the data versus what you can afford. The next two sections, ad sets and ads, are pretty full of options, but I'm just going to cover the main areas. Let me see. All right. In this section, we're now defining our ad set. By default, Facebook assumes you'll be driving traffic to your website, so we're good there. In the center of the page, you'll see that there's an option for dynamic creative. By selecting this, you can put in multiple messages, multiple images, and so on. And Facebook will experiment with different text along with different images to find a combination that works best. This is that great alternative to A/B testing that I spoke about, since you have this added benefit of automation, and there's like mixing and matching all the stuff that you give them. And so I do highly encourage you to use this feature. It can be very helpful. Beneath that, we see the option for an offer. And this is great if you want to promote a coupon code or if you're accepting reservations, because what it does is it just throws up a form, or it's some additional content. Next, budget and schedule. Let's see if that scrolls down. Good. This part self-explanatory. You can set it as ongoing or provide an end date. Usually, in the case of our example, we're we're going to promote a one-time event, and so in that case, you would set the end date. So, of course, the date of the event. Below that, we saw audience options. Now, Facebook has been kind enough to us to give us an audience expansion to reach people that are already researching travel options, and we will definitely keep that on. When it comes to setting your audience, it can be tempting to want to reach as many people as possible. And when you're boosting a post, sometimes that can make sense. But since we're just in one ad set of the campaign, let's be a little more specific. For example, let's say let's say that you have a first Friday or a or just a 1 day craft beer festival. It's a single day event that targets adults within a tighter radius than, say, your road trippers or your overnight traffic. We only want people within, say, a 10-mile drive of, in this example, we're going to go with Richmond, Virginia. They have to be interested in craft beer and dining out, which still gives us an audience of almost 10,000 people. Richmond has a massive craft beer scene, so that kind of checks out. Further down the page, you'll have your options for placement. Facebook will encourage you to use their automatic placement, and if it's your first campaign, I might say go with it, but for us, we tend to like a bit more control, so we use manual placement. All that does is show this drop down of where you'd like the ad to show. And since we typically like more budget going over to Instagram, we'll opt out of everything but the Facebook feed and Instagram. So by disabling everything else, we have a better chance of it showing more often in the options that we pick. And in this example, um, we're going to go with an image ad. As I said, we're going to go with a pretty simple ad here. If you're going to use video, then you might want to expand it to include stories. Um, but really, for image, text, and link, it's we just go with the Facebook feed and Instagram. Next, we create our ad. There are a million different ways to create a good ad, so we'll just focus on some must-haves. First, make sure to link your Instagram account at the top of the page. This can be overlooked, and Facebook may not stop you, and you'll end up just promoting on Facebook. So make sure that you check to make sure that that's connected. When it comes to the text that you use, the same rules apply to your Facebook posts. Don't use stop words like click here, share, uh, coupon, free. There's a whole list, and I mentioned them in an earlier webinar, and I'll kindly share them out. Just send me an email. Um, Keep your text brief but punchy. Some people choose to use emoticons in their content. I find nothing wrong with that as long as you don't go overboard. Let me see. Yes. Toward the bottom of the page, you'll see this option to build a URL parameter. And that can be a little intimidating. You can skip it if you want, but I'm gonna walk you through how to do that real quick. A URL parameter is a bit of code after the URL of where you want to send people. And that create something that you can then track in Google Analytics so you can be sure of which ad or which campaign the traffic has come from. Now, this pop-up here, it gives you a number of options, but each field is a drop-down. And these are the settings that we use, which cover the campaign and ad IDs. Um, you don't have to know the coding or anything. You can see though that, especially in the example of campaign name, how really the option drop down was campaign name. So it can be pretty self-explanatory, but if you want to just grab a screenshot of this, or you know reference the recording when we publish it, then that'll take care of you there. From there, you apply those changes and hit publish. The ad goes for review, and in most cases will go live within a few hours. In the meantime, you can build new ad sets, build new ads, go crazy. You may notice that I didn't talk about tracking pixels if you use them or if you've used them before. And that's because, first of all, we're only concerned with traffic from Facebook or Instagram to your website and so on. So not a lot of complex tracking there. Also, um, as iOS and these updates on Apple devices are in a state of flux, I have a feeling that tracking pixels are gonna run into some problems. So by setting it up this way, making sure you have the URL parameters set, you really don't need a lot of the stuff that's kind of in question right now. So that's Facebook. Each campaign and each ad that you run will be different, but you should be very diligent about checking your performance. I know we tend to look at our ad campaigns for our clients every couple days. Uh, some are really on top of it and monitor it daily, um, but to be safe, check it once a week, maybe even twice a week. That'd probably be the best frequency for you. All right, so that was Facebook. Now, I mentioned in a previous webinar that I'm hesitant to try to tackle Google Ads because there's a lot to it. A proper training would take hours, maybe a couple days, and we still wouldn't be able to share everything. But we're going to cover the basics today so that you can move forward without being intimidated, without being distracted and confused with all the options that are put in front of you. All right, when you begin the setup of a new account, the first thing you're going to set is your goal for your ad campaign, much like what we saw with Facebook. Now, these are pretty self-explanatory, but what I want to point out is at the very bottom of this screen. By default, Google will guide you through the creation of what they call a smart campaign. And these campaigns are highly automated, have far fewer settings, but historically haven't proven to offer the same return on investment that you'll see by having more control. They're also geared more toward physical or online stores. So a lot of the people on this call may feel like they're trying to do something with smart campaigns that smart campaigns aren't designed to do. So we're going to have to jump over into expert mode. Now, let's begin with setting up that first campaign. On one screen here, you're able to see setting your budget all the way to creating your first ad. So they've really condensed all of the basics to getting up and running. As far as budget goes for Google Ads, I do recommend that you keep it small at first and increase over time as you learn more about the success of your ads. In this case, $10 per day is not a bad place to start. So that's really budget. Pretty simple. Next, you're going to set your audience. This will be different for everyone, of course, but there are a couple different ways to target. You can do kind of like what we did with Facebook. where you just set a radius around your destination, or you can target by Nielsen DMAs, um, which are a little more specific. They have more clear boundaries, and they're usually clusters of, like for Richmond, it'll be Richmond and Petersburg, and for Northern Virginia, there are like three different DMAs in there. So it's not, you're not bound by county, but depending on how it's grouped by population. So you may have, let's say your destination is along a major interstate, and there are towns, clustered along that interstate. Chances are your Nielsen DMA may span a good part of that interstate. So check that out. And then on top of that, then you can grab those small towns or maybe places that are further out and then do a radius on them. So you can be really sophisticated on how you pick your audience on this. Um, let me see. All right. Uh, Networks. Google has two networks for you to leverage: search network and display network. Something to keep in mind when deciding your networks is that search ads cost more per click, but those that click those ads have much higher intent since they're already actively searching for information about what that ad's about. Display ads are going to be cheaper per click, but they're usually shown within the context of something that could be unrelated, and a lot of the traffic you get may only be mildly curious. However, display ads are great for keeping your brand top of mind and also for retargeting visitors to your site. I recommend that at this point, you go ahead and choose both because you want to have them both as options. When setting your keywords, the skill of a great campaign is in choosing keywords that don't have super high competition, but still get a good amount of traffic. As Google learns your ad account, they'll recommend new keywords over time. But to start, let's get some long tail keywords in your account. A quick refresher on long tail keywords. This is back from our search webinar back in January. Long tail keywords are longer keyword phrases that cover a feature about your destination, your location that people would be searching for, the location, which in this case can be a number of different things all at once, and then some more specifics that differentiate, your specific offering. By combining the three of those, it reduces the amount of competition while still getting to your targeted audience. So one of them might be Latin cuisine, Henrico County, open for lunch. It's pretty long, but it helps narrow down and get rid of any unwanted audience. Now, Google will also, in over time, suggest variations or the elimination of any redundant keywords you set. So you're going to get those recommendations over time. Next, you'll have the option to either set your own bids or let Google handle it for you. I know I've been kind of anti-automation through most of this, but in this case, I say almost always go with the automatic option because they'll never go over your set budget. So and they do a pretty good job of taking care of that. Next, you write your first ad and go with a basic text ad and continue. Once you enter your payment and hit continue, your account is set up and running, and your ad is being served under the keywords that you've entered. And you've bypassed probably about 90% of Google ads, all of which you should learn. But if you're anything like me, you kind of learn through context. And as ads need to be tweaked and stuff, things become relevant and things become important as you go. I want to go over one thing that you should definitely do as you're setting up your Google Ads account, because it's going to guide you through creating your first ad and all that kind of stuff. And then once you're kind of set free to manage the account, this is the first thing that you need to do. Connect your Google Analytics, and it probably won't give you a pop-up to tell you to do it, so you kind of have to dig. Go under settings and billing, and it's at the top of every page, and click on linked accounts, and it's going to give you a bunch of options. One of those is Google Analytics. Click on that, and it'll give you a step-by-step walkthrough. Really, you if you're logged in under the same Google account, it'll probably do most of it automatically for you. By having these two connected, you will get as much insight as possible into your campaign traffic, and there is more that we could cover in terms of UTM codes, event tracking, audiences, and conversions. And I think that may be the subject for the next webinar, where we kind of take things into an intermediate level. But the process we just covered today will get you up and running. And with that, I will gladly take any questions that may have